Hey, welcome to this video on solving for a given variable. This is the first lesson of Chapter 5. Notice we're starting off with problem 5.1. What we start off by doing is by recalling what we learned from Chapter 4, by asking you to look at this equation, y equals 4x plus 5, and asking you to identify the slope and the y-intercept. Well, what you need to remember from before is that this is in slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form was y equals mx plus b, where specifically m represented our slope and b represented our intercept, specifically our y-intercept. So here, if I ask you to identify the slope, I'm merely asking you to look at the number in front of x, and so we would say that the slope is 4. Or it could also be written as 4 over 1. All right? We also identify that the y-intercept in this case, b, is 5, and we'd write that y-intercept as 0, 5. What this tells us is if we were to graph it, that I could start at 5 on the y-axis and I could go up 4 over 1. Up 4 over 1. Because it's positive 4, positive meaning up, and then it's over top of 1, so we go over 1, always from left to right. If we looked at this in terms of a tile pattern, we could say that that figure 0 is starting with 5 tiles. That's our starting point, our y-intercept, and it's increasing because it's a positive slope. It's increasing by 4 tiles every time. That's what it's telling us. Now they take that and they ask you to now go to this problem. And they say identify the slope and y-intercept here where negative 6x plus 2y is equal to 10. Well, a lot of students, and I'm going to put this in red because it's wrong here, all right, but a lot of students would go, oh, m equals negative 6, and the y-intercept is 0, 10. All right? But in this case, that is wrong, because this is not in slope-intercept form. Notice it does not start with y equals. And that's where this lesson really comes to play, because we want to be able to take equations like this that are not in slope-intercept form, and we want to get them into slope-intercept form. That means that we need to solve for y. We need to have them say y equals, and everything else needs to be on the other side. That's our goal with this lesson today, that I can give you an equation with 2 variables and you can solve for one of those variables. Specifically in this lesson, solve for y. That's known as our given variable. The variable that we're asking you to solve for is our given variable. So let's do that. Well, how do we start? Start off by just solving this equation for y. Pause the video and I want you to solve this equation on your own for y and then come back to the video. All right, so I assume that you solved it. And if we were to go ahead and solve this, you would start by adding 6 to both sides. All right, and once you added 6, you'd have 2y on this side, and 10 plus 6 is 16, and you would divide by 2. All right, and then we'd find that y equals 8. All right, and that's all well and good. I want to challenge you with something, though. Would it be any different if I wrote it like this? Let me just erase this side over here. When I added 6 to 10, what if I just wrote 6 plus 10? Is that the same as 16? Yeah, it's the same as 16. All right, and then when I divided by 2, I do 6 divided by 2 to get 3, and 10 divided by 2 to get 5, and I find that that is indeed equal to 8. It's the same thing, right? So this would represent the same answer, just not simplified. I'm doing that intentionally for a reason, because I want to show you something. What if I took the same equation and I just added an x? Now there's an x in there. I've got both x and y, but I'm still asking you to solve for y. Well, in the same way that we solved for y here, all right, I'm going to do the same thing. Notice our steps. The first thing I did was I added 6 to both sides because that's the opposite of minus 6. Well, here I want to get y alone. When I say here, I'm looking over on the right side. I want to get y alone, and the first thing I need to do is move this x term. So I'm going to add 6x to both sides. So in the same way that I added 6 to both sides, I can also add 6x to both sides. That gives me 2y on this side. But on the right-hand side, I can't put these two together. They're not the same term. So I'm just going to write 6x positive 10. In other words, 6x plus 10. Now, I'm going to continue to solve for y. Notice here it was 2 times y. We did the opposite, which was division. Same thing here. It's 2 times y. So I'm going to divide by 2. What I do on one side, I must do on the other side. And here's our difference in solving for a given variable. I don't divide one number on the right-hand side by 2. I'm dividing both terms by 2. So I need to do 6x divided by 2. And 6 divided by 2 is 3, so 6x divided by 2 is 3x. And then 10 divided by 2 is 5. And I still can't put those together, but what I have now is slope-intercept form. Notice I have my slope, m equals 3, and I have my y-intercept here, 0, 5. So I've got my slope and my intercept from an equation that originally we could not find the slope-intercept from. All right, so that's the purpose of solving for a given variable, at least at this point in the game, so that we can identify the slope and y-intercept. Let's practice a little bit more. All right, if you are doing this for practice and not just review, I'd like you to go ahead and pause the video and try and solve this one for y. Then come back and see how you did. All right, coming back, check how you did. We draw our line down the center, and I want to make sure that both sides are simplified. There's no parentheses, so no distributive property needed. And they're both like, there's no like terms on either side, so I can't combine any like terms. So now I want to get all my y's on one side. Well, my y is right here, and it's the only one. So it's on the left side. I want to get rid of what's on that left side that's not a y term. That means my 2x term has to go. How do I get rid of a positive 2x? Well, I do the opposite. I subtract 2x from each side. That gives me y equals 3x minus 2x is x, and I didn't touch the minus 7. That is slope-intercept form. My slope is 1 because there's a 1 in front of my x, and my y-intercept is 0, comma, always 0, comma. My constant here is negative 7. All right, make sure you have a negative 7. All right, let's take a look at B. Again, pause the video, try to do it on your own. All right, let's see how you did. Draw my line down the center. I want to start by simplifying. There's no distributive property needed, and there's no like terms to combine on either side. Now let's get all my y's to one side. Well, my only y is right here, so my y's are on the left. What term on the left does not have a y? Well, this x term. How do I get rid of that x? Do the opposite. Subtract x from each side. This gives me 2y equals 2x plus 4. Now to continue solving for y, I notice it's 2 times y. The opposite of multiplication is division, so I divide both sides by 2. I need to divide the entire right side by 2. That means 2x divided by 2, which is just x, because 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 1 times x is x. And then 4 divided by 2 is 2. This is slope-intercept form. Starts with y equals, ends with an mx plus b form. And my slope here is 1, and my y-intercept is 0, 2. Try the next one. Again, pause, see if you can do it on your own. All right, coming back in, we draw our line down the center here. Nothing to simplify, no parentheses yet. We'll see that in the next problem. No combining like terms. However, now they're showing you y's on both sides of the equation. So I need to move a y. It doesn't matter which one you move. I encourage you to move the smallest of our y's. All right, it makes life a little bit easier here. So I'm going to move this 2y. How do I move a 2y? Well, I do the opposite. I subtract 2y from each side. 3y minus 2y is y. I didn't touch the plus 2. And over here, these canceled, which was nice, and I ended up with a negative 5x. Now my y's are on the left side over here. What term over here does not belong? It's this positive 2 because it doesn't have a y, so it doesn't belong over there with the other y's. How do I get rid of plus 2? Well, I subtract 2. I always do the opposite, so y equals. Can't combine negative 5x and negative 2, so I just write them both out. Negative 5x minus 2. All right, negative and minus, they could be written in the same way. All right, I don't need 2 negative signs there. I've got slope-intercept form now, and I can identify my slope here is negative 5, and my y-intercept is 0, negative 2. Let's try another one. This one's got distributive property now. Try and do it on your own. All right, coming back in, I draw my line down the center, and I'm going to distribute first here to simplify, giving me 2y minus 6 equals 2x minus 6. There's no like terms to combine, so I can go to the next step, which is get all my y's to one side. Well, all my y's are on one side. They're right here. That's it. So what on the left side does not belong? Well, this minus 6. How do I move it? I do the opposite. I add 6 to both sides. Notice I lined up the 6 over here with the other like term, the other 6. They're both constants. It helps me if I line those up. These will cancel, leaving me with 2y. And over here, 2x wasn't touched, but negative 6 plus 6 actually cancels out. All right, now to continue to solve, I notice it's 2 times y, so I'm going to do the opposite, which is to divide. What I do on one side, I must do on the other, and here I find that y is equal to x, because 2 divided by 2 will cancel there as well. And this is slope-intercept form. It looks a little unique. Keep in mind, it could be rewritten as y equals 1x plus 0 if you want to see the two parts we're looking for. But here we can identify that m is 1 because there's 1x, so slope of 1. And my y-intercept is 0, 0 because the constant being added is nothing. In other words, 0. All right, try another one. All right, practice this one here. Go ahead and pause it. All right, coming back in, let's see how you did. Draw our line down the center. This one also has the distributive property. Notice the -3 is what is in front of my parentheses here, so that's what I'm going to distribute. I'm not going to touch that 5 yet. But -3 times x is -3x, and -3 times 1 is -3. On the right-hand side, nothing to do. I can't simplify because there's no parentheses to distribute anything, and there's no like terms. Continuing on, I'm going to continue to simplify this left side over here. I notice I have 2 like terms, 5 and -3. That gives me 2 if I combine those. I didn't touch the -3x, and on the right-hand side, again, nothing to simplify, so I'm just going to keep going. Now let's go ahead. We simplified both sides. Let's get y on one side. I notice y is already on the right-hand side, and it's not anywhere else. So the right-hand side is where I'm going to keep my y's, and I need to get rid of any term that is not a y term. So here's an x term, and here's a constant. Both of those need to go. How do I get rid of a -3x? Well, I add 3x to both sides. All right. How do I get rid of a +2? Well, I subtract 2 from each side. And they gave us a really unique example here because in this case, 2 minus 2 is going to cancel. -3x plus 3x is going to cancel, and we have 0 on that left-hand side. On the right-hand side, these canceled. That was the intent. We did the opposite specifically to cancel them, giving us 2y. But I continue to solve. 0 is a number. Don't get tripped up just by that. It's still 2 times y. And how do I get rid of and multiply by 2? Well, I do the opposite. Divide by 2, giving me y equals 0. And I can rewrite that as y equals 0. Instead of having y on the right-hand side, you can always flip the entire equation. All right? Because y equals 0 and 0 equals y, it's the same thing. That's the reflexive property of equality. Now, from here, again, we could identify this as y equals 0x plus 0 because there are no x's, so my slope here is 0, and my y-intercept also happens to be 0 in this case here. All right, let's try one more. All right, try to do this one on your own. Pause it. All right, coming back in, draw our line down our center, and we're going to distribute. Careful, we're distributing just a negative here. That's what's directly in front of the parentheses. We do not distribute the x. The x isn't going to be touched. But a negative makes everything the opposite. Y becomes -y. Plus 2 becomes -2. Over here, I am distributing the 2. 2 times 2x is 4x, and 2 times 1 is 2. Now let's continue to solve. Make sure to get all my y's on one side. Well, all my y's are already over here on the left. So what on the left does not belong? Well, I need to get rid of this x. The opposite of plus x is to subtract x from each side. But what else does not belong is this -2, the constant term. What's the opposite of -2? Well, +2. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. That's moving all of my non-y terms to the right. On the left, these cancel, and I'm left with -y. Don't forget that negative sign. On the right side, I've got 4x minus x is 3x, and 2 plus 2 is 4. Now, my last step is to get y alone. Y has a negative here. It means it's the opposite. In other words, it's a -1 being multiplied by that y, and I can divide both sides by that -1. There are other ways to look at this step, but I'm going to show you this because we're used to dividing by the constant, by the coefficient of y. So I'm going to divide by that coefficient, in this case -1. All right, those cancel, give me y equals, and over here, 3x divided by -1 is a -3x, and 4 divided by -1 is a -4. That gives me my slope-intercept form because it's y equals mx plus b. And in this case, my slope m is -3, and my y-intercept here is 0, -4. That's how to solve for a given variable. If you want to see a more complicated version, watch part 2 of this video series, and good luck.